Entire cities once thrived for centuries without a single power line. This was the genius of ancient self-sustaining cities, masterpieces designed by brilliant engineers whose names have been erased by time. By the end of this journey, you will understand the revolutionary principles that allowed these urban centers to flourish completely independently. We will uncover how a desert metropolis secretly harvested millions of gallons of water, and why a mountain citadel remains standing after hundreds of earthquakes. How much of our modern wisdom about sustainable living was already known to these forgotten architects? The blueprint for a self-sustaining city was first sketched not in grand metropolises, but in the humble soil of early villages. Communities learned to listen to the land, to understand the rhythm of the seasons and the flow of water. They discovered that a society could not simply take from its environment. It had to give back to create a delicate balance where waste from one process became nutrients for another. This was not a choice, but a necessity for survival across countless generations. Think of the very first farmers who realized that planting certain crops together made the soil richer, not poorer, or the builders who oriented their homes to capture the sun's warmth in winter and the cooling breeze in summer. These were not random acts, they were the first crucial steps in a new kind of engineering, one that worked with nature rather than against it. From these simple, brilliant beginnings, the stage was set for something truly monumental. The principles of the village were about to be scaled into the wonders of the ancient world. A self-sustaining city was a living organism, a single entity where every part communicated with every other. The waste from human activity did not pollute the rivers. Instead, it fertilized the terraced gardens that grew the food. The very shape of the buildings did more than provide shelter. They captured rainwater, channeled cooling winds, and used the sun's path for natural heating and lighting. This was a closed-loop system, a brilliant cycle where nothing was truly wasted and everything had a purpose. Imagine a single drop of rain falling on such a city. It would not simply run off into the ground. It would be caught by a cleverly designed roof, then channeled into a network of underground cisterns for storage. That same water would later nourish crops, and the organic waste from those harvested crops would, in turn, be used to enrich the soil for the next planting. The city itself was the engine, the farm, and the recycler all at once. This holistic design meant these urban centers could thrive for generations in places we would consider uninhabitable today, from barren deserts to remote mountain peaks. So what were the fundamental rules these forgotten engineers followed to create such enduring marvels? The first and most vital principle was their absolute mastery of water. Without a reliable source, no city could hope to endure, let alone flourish. Ancient engineers treated water not as a random gift from the sky, but as a predictable resource to be guided, stored, and cherished. They became masters of gravity, shaping stone and earth to make water flow where it was needed most. The Romans, for instance, built aqueducts that marched across valleys and hills for dozens of miles. These were not just simple channels. They were precisely angled stone highways that used the gentle, unceasing pull of gravity to deliver fresh water from mountain springs directly into the heart of bustling cities. Every slight downward slope was calculated to maintain a steady, manageable flow without erosion or stagnation. But what about places where distant mountains and steady springs were just a dream? In the heart of the desert, the Nabataeans who built Petra performed an even greater miracle. They learned to read the landscape like a map, carving vast, intricate cisterns directly into the solid rock of canyon walls. These hidden reservoirs captured every precious drop of seasonal rain, creating a secret, stored ocean that could sustain a population of thousands through the harshest droughts. Their methods went far beyond simple collection. They engineered entire watersheds, carving channels to divert flash floods away from structures and into their storage systems. They built sophisticated sand filtration tanks that cleaned the water before it ever reached a cistern. They designed underground tunnels known as kanats that tapped into hidden groundwater aquifers miles away, tunneling with such precision that the water would seep into the channel and flow steadily to the surface without a single pump. This was a complete cyclical system. It collected water from rooftops and paved plazas. It stored it safely underground, protected from evaporation and contamination. It distributed it through ceramic pipes to public fountains, baths, and private homes. And finally, it managed the waste, using stone sewers and drainage channels to carry used water away to fertilize agricultural fields, completing the cycle. This deep, integrated understanding of hydrology set the unshakable foundation for everything else. A city that had conquered its thirst was ready to build toward the sky. With their thirst quenched by ingenious water systems, these cities faced their next great challenge, feeding thousands of mouths without sprawling farmlands that stretched for miles. The second principle these forgotten engineers mastered was the seamless integration of agriculture directly into the urban fabric. They did not see a city and its farmland as separate entities. Instead, they wove them together into a single, productive tapestry. Think of a city not as a stone fortress, but as a living, breathing garden. Steep hillsides within the city walls were transformed into lush, terraced steps, each level catching sunlight and holding soil to grow vegetables, fruits, and grains. This was farming in 3 dimensions, a massive increase in food production without expanding the city's footprint. In lake regions, engineers created floating gardens, rafts of soil and reeds that bobbed on the water's surface. These were more than just fertile plots. The roots of the plants dangling below acted as a natural filtration system, cleansing the water of impurities while the crops above flourished. This is the brilliance of a closed-loop system in action, where a single solution solved multiple problems at once. Perhaps the most stunning example comes from the Maya with their chinampas. In swampy lowlands, they would weave huge rectangular enclosures from reeds, stake them into the lakebed, and fill them with layers of rich mud and decaying vegetation. These artificial islands never dried out, constantly drawing nutrient-rich water from the canals that surrounded them. The result was unbelievably fertile land capable of yielding up to 7 harvests in a single year, essentially creating permanent, sustainable agriculture. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, engineers turned the arid plains into fertile breadbaskets with complex irrigation canals that branched out from the great rivers like veins from a heart. They used simple gravity to deliver life-giving water to fields that were literally part of the city's outer districts. This deep integration meant food was grown right where the people lived. There was no need for long, vulnerable supply chains stretching across the countryside. A family's daily bread might come from a terrace just a short walk from their home, ensuring profound local food security. This urban farming ingenuity did more than just fill bellies. It transformed the very air of the city, added greenery for shade and cooling, and created a constant cycle where organic waste from the city could be composted and returned directly to the soil. But how did these well-fed, well-watered populations manage to build structures that have withstood the test of centuries, even in the most violent seismic zones? The third principle reveals a wisdom that modern architecture is only now rediscovering. These cities were masters of passive energy, achieving perfect comfort without a single watt of electricity. Their secret was not in generating power, but in designing buildings and entire urban plans that worked in harmony with the sun, the wind, and the very earth itself. They possessed a profound understanding of thermodynamics, a science of heat and energy flow that feels centuries ahead of its time. Think of an entire city carefully angled to the path of the sun. Streets were laid out not at random, but to catch the low, warming rays of the winter sun while providing deep, cooling shade during the scorching summer months. Buildings were constructed from materials with natural thermal mass, like thick stone and adobe brick. These materials absorbed heat during the day, preventing interiors from becoming ovens, and then gently released that stored warmth throughout the cool desert nights. In the American Southwest, the Anasazi built their stunning cliff dwellings deep into canyon walls. The massive rock face acted as a natural temperature regulator, shielding them from the intense daytime heat and the freezing cold of the night. Their homes maintained a remarkably stable, comfortable climate year-round through pure architectural intelligence. Meanwhile, in the hot, arid plains of Persia, architects engineered a breathtakingly simple solution called the wind catcher. These tall, tower-like structures rose above the rooftops, capturing the slightest breeze from high in the atmosphere. They funneled this cool air down into the heart of the buildings below, while simultaneously drawing the warm, stagnant air up and out. It was a completely passive air conditioning system, creating constant, refreshing ventilation without any moving parts or energy consumption. This was not magic. It was a deep, observational science. These forgotten engineers knew exactly how the sun would travel across the sky in every season. They understood prevailing wind patterns and how to channel them. They selected their building materials not just for strength, but for their inherent ability to interact with the environment. By working with these natural forces rather than fighting them, they created urban habitats of unparalleled efficiency and resilience. But a city is more than just a collection of comfortable homes. It is a complex society that produces waste, and managing that waste without poisoning the environment was the next great frontier for these ancient innovators. Even the most efficiently designed city produces waste, but for these ancient engineers, that was not the end of a process. It was the beginning of another. The fourth principle they mastered was the radical idea of waste as a resource. They saw potential problems as untapped opportunities, creating a circular economy where nothing was truly thrown away. Human and organic waste was not a pollutant to be disposed of, but a vital nutrient to be cycled back into the system. Envision a sewage system where the outflow did not poison a river. Instead, it was carefully channeled through stone conduits to fertilize vast agricultural fields on the city's outskirts. This transformed a sanitation challenge into a powerful agricultural engine, closing the nutrient loop and ensuring the soil remained rich and productive for generation after generation. At the household level, composting was a refined science. Food scraps, ash from fires, and other organic materials were systematically collected and broken down into rich, black humus. This compost was then used to replenish the soil in those intricate urban gardens and terraced farms, turning what would have been piles of refuse into the very lifeblood of the city's food supply. One of the most sophisticated examples comes from the great cities of the Indus Valley civilization, like Mohenjo-Daro. They built an advanced, city-wide drainage system with covered channels that ran beneath their streets. But their genius went beyond just moving water. They appear to have designed systems that could separate gray water from kitchens and bathing from black water, allowing for different, safe reuse in agriculture or for cleaning. This meticulous management minimized pollution to an astonishing degree while maximizing every drop of water and every ounce of organic material for the city's benefit. This was not a primitive approach. It was a revolutionary concept that modern sustainability efforts are only now beginning to fully appreciate and replicate. These forgotten innovators understood that a truly self-sustaining system has no exit door. Everything must flow in a continuous, renewing circle. So how did they bring all these principles together? How did water management, integrated farming, passive energy, and waste recycling unite to create a city that could truly stand the test of time? A city could possess all these brilliant systems yet still vanish in a single season of siege or conflict. The fifth and final principle these forgotten engineers mastered was defensive sustainability, a profound understanding that true resilience required protecting the very lifeblood of the city from external threats. Security and self-sufficiency were not separate goals. They were two sides of the same coin, woven together in the very fabric of their urban design. Consider the mighty walls of a city like Byzantine Constantinople. They were not merely defensive barriers for soldiers. They were protective shells for the city's beating heart, enclosing vast granaries, sprawling internal farmlands, and immense secret cisterns. An enemy army could camp outside for years, and life within would continue with a semblance of normalcy. The city's engineers had designed it to be an island of plenty in a sea of scarcity. The famous Theodosian walls were a marvel of military architecture, but their true genius lay in what they safeguarded. Beneath the city's streets and palaces lay enormous underground reservoirs like the Basilica cistern, capable of holding millions of gallons of water, completely protected from sabotage or contamination. This meant that even during the longest siege, the city's fountains would still flow and its people would not thirst. This principle of defensive sustainability extended to every critical resource. Vital agricultural zones were often located within the safety of the outer defensive rings or were designed to be easily protected. In some mountain citadels, engineers carved terraced farms directly into the fortified hillsides, ensuring the food supply was never cut off. They even went so far as to create hidden springs and camouflaged wells, their locations a closely guarded secret to prevent an enemy from poisoning the water source. This was urban planning at its most strategic and forward-thinking. It recognized that a sustainable city had to be prepared not just for environmental challenges like drought, but for the human challenges of conflict and scarcity. The ultimate goal was to create a system so robust, so internally complete, that it could endure any crisis, whether it came from the sky in the form of a drought or from the horizon in the form of an army. These engineers built civilizations meant to last 1,000 years, and to do that, they had to build them to survive. Their names have been erased by the shifting sands of time, not by some great disaster, but by the very nature of their work. History's grand chronicles are filled with the names of kings who commanded armies and emperors who conquered lands. But the masterminds who engineered civilizations to last 1,000 years remain silent, anonymous figures. This loss of identity was not a failure of record-keeping. It was often a deliberate cultural choice. In many of these societies, the collective good and the community's survival were held in higher esteem than individual fame. A single name attached to a city's revolutionary water system would have been seen as arrogant, even disruptive. The true credit belonged to the community that built it and the generations that would maintain it. These master builders were part of an unbroken chain of knowledge, teaching their apprentices through hands-on practice and oral tradition. There were no signed blueprints, only the shared understanding of how to angle an aqueduct or shape a wind catcher, knowledge passed down like a precious heirloom from one generation of artisans to the next. Furthermore, the sheer scale of these projects made individual attribution almost impossible. How do you name the architect of a city that took 200 years to complete? The original designer would be long gone before the first stone of the outer wall was even set. Their grandchildren would continue the work, and their great-grandchildren would finally see it finished, each generation adding its own refinements and improvements. The final, magnificent structure was the product of 100 minds and 1,000 hands, a symphony of collective intelligence where no single musician claimed the spotlight. This anonymity forces us to look at their legacy not as a list of inventors, but as a testament to what humanity can achieve when we work together toward a common, enduring goal. The true monument to these forgotten engineers is not a statue with a name, but the simple, profound fact that their cities still stand, whispering their secrets to anyone willing to listen. Hidden in the red sandstone cliffs of Jordan's desert, the city of Petra did not just survive its harsh environment, it mastered it. The Nabataeans who built this metropolis were hydrological artists, seeing potential in the very rock and rare rainfall that others would view as a wasteland. They understood that in the desert, water is not just a resource, it is life itself, and every single drop must be captured, guided, and protected. Their entire city was engineered as one immense, intricate water collection machine. They carved channels with painstaking precision directly into the canyon walls, turning solid rock into a network of aqueducts that would not erode or leak. These channels were not random. They were calculated to follow the natural contours of the land, using gravity to guide precious water toward massive, hidden cisterns. These cisterns were not simple holes in the ground. They were vast, waterproof chambers carved deep into the mountain, some large enough to hold the water supply for an entire neighborhood. When the rare, violent rainstorms did come, the entire cityscape transformed. Every paved street, every courtyard, every rooftop became a catchment surface. The water that would have caused destructive flash floods in any other canyon was instead instantly channeled into this subterranean storage network. The system was so sophisticated it even included settling tanks and sand filters to remove debris and silt before the water entered the main reservoirs, ensuring the stored supply remained clean and potable for months. This hydraulic genius allowed Petra to support a population of tens of thousands in the heart of a barren desert, a feat that seems to defy logic even today. The city's breathtaking temples and tombs carved into pink rock are what capture the eye, but its true wonder lies hidden in the empty channels and silent, dark cisterns that made such grandeur possible. Far from the desert canyons of Petra, another city achieved a different kind of miracle in the fertile Indus Valley. Mohenjo-Daro was a metropolis built not for defense against nature, but for harmony within it. Around 2,500 years before the Common Era, while many cultures were still in villages, its engineers laid out one of the world's first master-planned cities. The entire urban center was constructed on a precise grid system, with wide, straight main streets and smaller lanes branching off in perfect order. This was not an organic, haphazard growth. It was a conscious design for efficiency and public health, a concept that would not become common again for thousands of years. The builders used standardized, kiln-fired bricks, each one a uniform ratio, making construction predictable and incredibly robust. But the true genius of Mohenjo-Daro lies beneath its streets. A sophisticated, city-wide drainage system ran like a hidden circulatory system. Almost every single house had its own bathroom and a direct connection to this network of covered sewers. These brick-lined channels ran under the main avenues, equipped with inspection holes and sump pits to catch solid waste, allowing water to flow freely. Waste was channeled away from homes and public spaces, preventing disease and contamination in a way that would be remarkable for any era. At the heart of the city stood the Great Bath, a large, watertight pool lined with precise brickwork and sealed with a natural tar. While it likely served a ritual purpose, it stands as a monument to their hydraulic engineering. Filled by a well and drained by a massive corbelled arch sewer, it demonstrates an astonishing understanding of water management on a grand scale. How did a civilization so ancient conceive of public works with such foresight? Their systematic approach to infrastructure created a standard of urban living that was simply unparalleled in the ancient world. High on a razor-sharp Andean ridge, the stones of Machu Picchu seemed to grow directly from the mountain itself. This was not a city imposed upon the landscape, but one woven into its very fabric. The Inca engineers who conceived this masterpiece understood a fundamental truth that many modern builders have forgotten. To create something truly lasting, you must work with the terrain, not against it. They saw the steep, unstable slopes not as an obstacle but as an opportunity. Their solution was a breathtaking network of agricultural terraces that cascaded down the mountainsides. These were far more than just flat spaces for growing food. Each terrace was a complex, layered structure. At its base, a foundation of large stones provided drainage and stability. Above that, layers of smaller gravel, sand, and rich topsoil were carefully laid down. This ingenious design acted like a giant sponge, capturing torrential rain and allowing it to seep slowly into the ground, nourishing the crops while completely preventing the catastrophic soil erosion that would have otherwise washed the entire mountainside away. These terraces were not just farms, they were the engineering that held the mountain together. But what about the structures they built upon this precarious ridge? How could buildings possibly survive the violent earthquakes that shudder through the Andes? The answer lies in the stones. The Inca stonemasons achieved a level of precision that defies belief. They shaped massive granite blocks to fit together so perfectly that you cannot slip a piece of paper between them. This famous dry stone construction, using no mortar whatsoever, was their secret to seismic resilience. When an earthquake strikes, a rigid building with mortar cracks and crumbles, but the walls of Machu Picchu are designed to dance. The precisely fitted stones lock together, yet they have just enough flexibility to shift and sway with the ground's movement. When the tremors stop, the stones simply settle back into their original positions. It is a brilliant, passive system that has kept these structures standing for centuries. This architectural genius extended to the very ground beneath their feet. The entire city is a masterpiece of water management. The Inca engineers carved more than 120 drainage canals directly into the terraces and foundations. These channels intercepted groundwater and rainwater, guiding it safely through the city and away from the structures. Even during the heaviest downpours, the water had a predetermined path to follow, protecting the buildings from flooding and undermining. This is why the stone foundations of Machu Picchu remain perfectly intact today. While a modern city would have long since washed down the mountain, every element of the design was intentional, even spiritual. The alignment of sacred buildings with solstices and other celestial events reveals a world view where engineering, astronomy, and religion were inseparable. The city was not just a place to live, it was a carefully calibrated instrument, harmonizing human life with the powerful forces of the earth and the sky. At Machu Picchu, you do not see a battle between civilization and nature. You witness a perfect, enduring partnership. The stones themselves seem to whisper the secrets of their longevity. Ancient engineers did not simply use whatever was at hand. They engaged in a profound dialogue with their environment, selecting and even inventing materials with a foresight that feels almost prophetic. This was a sophisticated science of place, where every choice was a calculated response to local challenges, creating structures that were not just built for their time, but engineered for all time. The Romans faced the relentless, corrosive power of the sea. When they built harbors like the one at Caesarea ordinary concrete would have crumbled to dust in a few decades. Their solution was a revolutionary formula that seems to defy logic. By mixing volcanic ash from the town of Pozzuoli with lime and seawater, they created a concrete that actually grows stronger when submerged. The salt water triggers a complex chemical reaction, forming rare, interlocking minerals that fortify the structure against the waves. Modern scientists only confirmed this self-healing property in the last few years, yet Roman engineers perfected it 2,000 years ago. In the stark extremes of the Egyptian desert, builders selected limestone and granite not just for their grandeur, but for their incredible thermal stability. These dense stones can absorb the scorching heat of the day without transferring it all indoors, and then release it slowly during the cold nights, acting as a natural climate buffer. The pyramids at Giza endure not merely because they are massive, but because they are made from a material perfectly suited to a land of blazing sun and chilly nights. On the other side of the world, Mesoamerican engineers at cities like Teotihuacan utilized local volcanic rock, a lightweight, porous material filled with tiny air pockets. This created a natural insulation layer, keeping interiors cool under the fierce Mexican sun. They were effectively building with a primitive version of modern aerated concrete. Meanwhile, in the humid, monsoonal climates of Southeast Asia, the builders of places like Anchor turned to specific, resilient woods like teak and ironwood. These timbers possess natural oils that repel water and make them virtually impervious to the termites and rot that would devour ordinary lumber in a matter of years. This was not a matter of lucky guesses. It was the result of painstaking, cumulative observation over centuries. A builder would notice that one particular quarry's stone cracked in the frost while another's held firm. A community would remember that a temple built with a certain type of wood remained standing long after others had returned to the earth. This hard-won knowledge, passed down through generations of artisans, formed a living library of materials science. Their legacy is a challenge to our own era of standardized, shipped across the globe construction materials. They teach us that the most durable solution is often the one that listens most closely to the voice of the local earth. The silent stones of these cities hold more than just physical secrets. They are monuments to a forgotten language of numbers, a mathematical precision that guided every curve and cornerstone. Behind the grand, sweeping arches and the perfectly balanced domes was a sophisticated understanding of geometry and physics, all achieved without the aid of computers or even the decimal system. These engineer-architects did not simply build by feel, they calculated. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the most famous example, its base forming a near-perfect square with sides aligned to the cardinal directions with an error of less than a single degree. This was not an accident. It was the result of meticulous astronomical observation and a deep grasp of geometric principles that allowed them to translate celestial patterns into staggering earthly monuments. In ancient Greece, the Parthenon was constructed using the golden ratio, a specific mathematical proportion found throughout nature, from the spiral of a nautilus shell to the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. By embedding this ratio into the very dimensions of their temples, they created buildings that the human eye perceives as inherently beautiful and perfectly harmonious. But this mathematical genius was not just about aesthetics, it was fundamentally about survival. How do you design an arch that can support the weight of a massive aqueduct for centuries? The answer lies in the precise calculation of load distribution, understanding exactly how force travels through stone and how to channel it safely into the ground. These builders knew intuitively what we now express with complex equations, that the strength of a structure depends on its shape as much as its material. A perfectly fitted corbelled arch or a gracefully curved dome is a physical solution to a mathematical problem, a way to make stone defy gravity through pure geometry. The Maya in Mesoamerica encoded their astronomical knowledge into their city plans, aligning pyramids and temples with the movements of Venus, the Sun, and the Moon. These alignments required years, even generations, of precise celestial observation and the mathematical ability to project those observations onto the landscape. They were building cosmic calendars in stone, structures that not only housed their people but also mapped the heavens themselves. This ability to translate abstract numbers into enduring physical form represents one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements. We are only now, with advanced laser scanning and computational modeling, beginning to fully unravel the calculations they performed in their heads and with simple ropes and stakes. Their legacy is a challenge to our modern arrogance, a quiet reminder that the foundation of our technological world was laid not in silicon, but in stone, and not with circuits, but with a profound and elegant understanding of the mathematical truths that govern our universe. The precise geometry of their cities was more than an exercise in mathematics. It was a sacred language, a way of writing their understanding of the cosmos directly onto the earth. For these forgotten engineers, the division between practical necessity and spiritual devotion simply did not exist. Their blueprints were prayers, and their infrastructure was a form of worship. A straight avenue was not just a convenient path for trade. It was an axis mundi, a symbolic connection between the human world and the realm of the gods. The layout of a traditional Chinese capital, for instance, was a physical embodiment of feng shui principles. The city was a mirror of the celestial order, carefully positioned between protective mountains and a life-giving river, with its gates and main buildings oriented to channel positive energy or Kai. This was not mere superstition. It was a sophisticated environmental science that, by seeking spiritual harmony, naturally led to sustainable outcomes. A city aligned with the land and the winds was, by its very nature, a healthier, more resilient, and more efficient place to live. In Mesoamerica, the Grand Pyramid at Chichen Itza offers a stunning example of this fusion. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun casts a shadow along the northern staircase that perfectly resembles a serpent slithering down from the sky to earth. This was a breathtakingly precise astronomical event engineered into stone, a moment where architecture, calendar, and mythology became one. It transformed the entire structure into a colossal timekeeping device and a powerful religious symbol, all while serving as the central landmark of the city. Even their most utilitarian structures were imbued with deeper meaning. A temple complex was rarely just a place for prayer. It was often the city's primary water management hub. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro likely served a ritual cleansing purpose, but it was also the apex of a complex hydraulic system. In the Andes, a carved stone channel directing water to a field was not just an irrigation pipe. It was an offering to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, acknowledging that human survival was a gift from the natural world. This holistic worldview meant that every act of engineering was also an act of reverence. To pollute a river was not just bad sanitation. It was a spiritual offense. To waste resources was to show disrespect to the divine order. This cultural framework enforced a powerful ethic of conservation and balance that modern sustainability efforts struggle to replicate. The endurance of their cities is a testament to this profound integration. They built for the body and the soul simultaneously, creating urban landscapes that were not merely inhabited, but truly lived in every sense of the word. Every stone they laid was a conversation with the sky. The forgotten engineers were not just builders, they were master adapters, reading the local climate like a detailed set of instructions for survival. They understood that a design perfect for a humid river delta would be a death sentence in a windswept desert, and so they invented a stunning diversity of architectural solutions, each one perfectly tailored to its environment. In the blistering heat of North Africa and the Middle East, cities were designed as intricate mazes of narrow, winding streets. This was not a chaotic layout. It was a deliberate creation of deep, cooling shade for most of the day, but their genius went further. These tight corridors were angled to catch the prevailing winds, accelerating the breeze and creating natural wind tunnels that flushed stagnant, hot air out of the city and pulled in cooler drafts. Walking through these streets was like moving through a naturally air-conditioned canyon. For the bitter cold of regions like Cappadocia in modern Turkey, the solution was to go down, not up. Entire cities were carved deep into the soft volcanic rock, creating vast underground metropolises that could shelter thousands. Below the surface, the Earth's stable temperature provided perfect insulation, keeping dwellings warm in the harsh winter and refreshingly cool during the scorching summer. These were not simple caves, but complex multi-level communities with ventilation shafts, wells, and stables, all engineered for a life of subterranean comfort. On the high mesas of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans chose the cliffs. Their dwellings at places like Mesa Verde were tucked deep under massive, overarching sandstone cliffs. These natural rock shelters acted as a giant buffer against the extremes. In summer, the stone canopy blocked the intense sun, and in winter, it protected the villages from snow and biting winds. Their positioning was a masterclass in passive thermal regulation, leveraging the mountain itself to maintain a livable climate. Meanwhile, in the monsoon-drenched regions of Southeast Asia, communities built their homes on stilts. This elegant solution elevated living spaces high above the seasonal floodwaters, protecting both property and health. The raised floors allowed floodwaters to pass harmlessly underneath, prevented ground dampness, and improved ventilation to combat mold. It was a direct, intelligent response to an annual environmental certainty. This profound climate responsiveness was not a luxury. It was the absolute bedrock of their survival. A standardized approach would have been catastrophic. Their success came from a deep, localized intelligence, a quality that much of our modern, one-size-fits-all construction has tragically left behind. They prove that true resilience is not about controlling the environment, but about learning to listen and adapt with graceful ingenuity. A city could produce a mountain of grain, but that meant nothing if the harvest rotted before winter's end. The art of preservation was an engineering discipline in its own right, a silent war against decay, pests, and time. These forgotten innovators created solutions that turned perishable abundance into lasting security, building larders that could outlast any crisis. In the arid heart of Persia, they harnessed the earth itself as a natural refrigerator. The same canal tunnels that brought water from distant aquifers also created a perfect, stable climate underground. They carved out vast, cool chambers known as yakchuls, where the constant, low temperature and dry air prevented food from spoiling for months. This was not merely a cellar, it was a climate-controlled vault built with nothing more than mud brick and profound wisdom. High on the sun-baked cliffs of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans engineered their granaries with equal brilliance. They constructed small, sealed rooms of stone and adobe in high, dry alcoves, far from the dampness of the canyon floor. Their design was a masterclass in passive preservation. The elevated location ensured constant air circulation, keeping the stored corn and beans dry, while the stone walls and narrow openings protected the precious harvest from rodents and insects. A single family's carefully stored surplus could mean the difference between life and death during a lean year. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire, feeding a metropolis of 1 million people, industrialized this concept. Their horia were monumental warehouses, marvels of logistical engineering. These were not dark, musty sheds. They were built with raised floors suspended on pillars, creating an air gap that prevented ground moisture from seeping upward. Walls were constructed with double layers and ventilation shafts, ensuring a continuous flow of dry air that swept through the entire structure, preventing mold and spoilage. Some of these imperial storehouses could hold enough grain to feed the city of Rome for years, a strategic reserve that stabilized an empire. This was the final, critical link in the chain of self-sufficiency. A city might have perfect water systems and flourishing urban farms, but without these ingenious preservation techniques, its survival was always just one bad season away from collapse. The ability to save for tomorrow what was grown today transformed a thriving settlement into an unshakable civilization. How did these resilient networks of knowledge, perfected over centuries, finally begin to fade from memory? But how did people and goods move through these intricate urban systems without the roar of engines or the haze of exhaust? The arteries of these cities were not paved with asphalt for cars, but designed for the human pace and the natural flow of water. Movement itself was an act of sustainability, engineered to consume as little energy as possible while connecting every vital function of the urban body. In the vast ceremonial center of Teotihuacan, the wide Avenue of the Dead was far more than a path for religious processions. Its impressive width and carefully leveled surface allowed for the efficient movement of large numbers of people and goods on foot or carried by porters, directly linking the temples and palaces with the outlying residential districts. This was a grand thoroughfare that balanced spiritual spectacle with the practical needs of daily commerce and communication. For cities built upon water, the solution was even more elegant. The canal networks of places like Tenochtitlan and later Venice were not merely charming waterways. They were the equivalent of modern freeways, a high-capacity transit system that moved people and heavy cargo with incredible efficiency. A single large canoe poled along a canal could carry the weight of dozens of porters, reducing the physical strain on the population and eliminating the need for vast tracts of land to be paved over for roads. This water-based mobility was a masterstroke of spatial economy, turning a geographic challenge into a sustainable advantage. In the rugged Andes, the Inca faced a different kind of challenge, vertical terrain that would seem to defy any network. Their response was one of the most astounding transportation systems ever created. They engineered a vast network of roads that stretched for thousands of miles, overcoming impossible geography with sheer ingenuity. Where deep ravines blocked the path, they wove suspension bridges from mountain grasses, structures strong enough to support armies and llama caravans, yet flexible enough to sway with the violent mountain winds. In places too steep for a path, they carved stairways directly into the cliff face. This was not about finding the easiest route, but about creating the most direct and enduring connection between the mountain citadels and their farmlands, their mines and their people. Every step of the journey was calculated. The gentle, consistent grade of an Inca road allowed a messenger to run for miles without exhausting himself. The placement of way stations, known as tambos, at a day's travel interval ensured that travelers could rest and resupply, making the entire system not just a path but a supported journey. This holistic thinking reveals a profound truth about these cities. They were not a random collection of brilliant systems for water, food, and shelter. They were unified organisms where the circulation of people and goods was as carefully planned as the flow of water or the capture of sunlight. The layout of a street, the curve of a canal, the placement of a stairway, all of it was part of a single, comprehensive blueprint for a society that moved in harmony with its world, not in a rush against it. The true genius of these cities pulsed in their public hearts, in the open spaces where people gathered not just by chance but by design. These were not empty plazas. They were meticulously engineered social engines where the flow of human interaction was guided as carefully as the flow of water. In the Greek agora, a citizen could hear a philosopher's lecture, buy fresh fish, and then join a heated political debate, all within a single, sprawling square. The ground itself was often slightly sloped, creating a natural amphitheater so that a speaker's voice could carry to hundreds of listeners without shouting. The colonnades provided shade for merchants and shade for conversation, their rhythmic columns creating a sense of order and calm amidst the bustling crowd. This was a space that understood human nature, facilitating everything from commerce to culture to democracy in one integrated, walkable environment. The Romans perfected this concept in their forums, turning public space into a multifunctional tool for empire. The Forum Romanum was the nerve center of a continent-spanning civilization, a place where laws were proclaimed, treaties were signed, and goods from across the known world were traded. Its engineering was sublime. Broad, paved walkways allowed for the smooth movement of thousands, while raised platforms and temples gave officials a clear vantage point, making them visible and their voices audible to the assembled masses. The very materials were chosen for their effect, the gleam of white marble and the echo of a footstep on stone creating an atmosphere of grandeur and authority. This multifunctional design was not an accident. It was a deliberate strategy for social sustainability. By weaving together the threads of daily life, commerce, and governance in a central, accessible location, these spaces forged a powerful sense of shared identity and community. A person did not live in one district, work in another, and seek entertainment in a third. Their life intersected in the agora or the forum, strengthening the social fabric with every encounter. This efficient design minimized the need for long, wasteful journeys across the city, concentrating civic energy and fostering the face-to-face interactions that are the bedrock of a resilient society. The stones of these plazas were laid not just to hold up buildings, but to hold a civilization together. Even the most brilliantly planned city lived under the shadow of catastrophe. Earthquakes, floods, and fires were constant, terrifying threats, and the true test of an engineer's genius was not just in creating comfort, but in building for survival. These forgotten architects did not wait for disaster to strike. They anticipated it, designing urban landscapes with a built-in resilience that allowed communities to endure and recover with astonishing speed. In the seismic heart of Japan, builders confronted the relentless threat of earthquakes with a revolutionary concept: flexibility. The iconic multi-story pagodas, soaring high into the air, should have been the first structures to collapse during a tremor. Instead, they have danced through countless quakes for centuries. Their secret lies in a central pillar, a massive, suspended trunk of wood that hangs like a pendulum from the upper stories, never fully anchored to the ground. When the earth shakes, each roof sways independently in a rhythm opposite to the one below it, counteracting the violent forces and allowing the entire tower to sway gracefully rather than shatter. It is a lesson in absorbing and redirecting energy that modern engineers still study today. Meanwhile, in the floodplains of Mesopotamia, the solution was to rise above the danger. The great ziggurats were not just temples reaching for the gods. They were massive, elevated platforms designed to protect their sacred and administrative hearts from the unpredictable, raging floods of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. By building these crucial structures on immense, man-made mountains of mud brick, engineers ensured that even when the waters swallowed the surrounding plains, the center of civic and religious life remained secure, a beacon of stability above the chaos. On the island of Crete, the Minoan palaces at Knossos showcase a different kind of foresight. They faced the destructive power of torrential rains. Their answer was an elaborate, integrated drainage system that wove through the entire complex. Stone channels ran under floors and alongside walkways, swiftly capturing runoff and guiding it away from foundations and storage rooms. These were not mere gutters. They were a subterranean network that prevented erosion, flooding, and structural damage, ensuring the palace could weather violent storms without faltering. And in the dense, bustling warrens of ancient Rome, engineers learned a brutal lesson from the Great Fire that consumed much of the city. In its aftermath, new building codes and urban plans were enacted with one clear goal: to stop fire from spreading. They mandated wider main streets, not just for grandeur, but to act as fire breaks, creating gaps too wide for flames to leap across. They encouraged the use of more fire-resistant materials like brick and concrete for party walls, and they positioned aqueducts and public fountains strategically throughout the city to provide immediate water for firefighting. This profound resilience was never an accident. It was the direct result of learning from past failures, of observing how nature attacked, and then devising a smarter, stronger defense. These cities stand as a powerful testament to a proactive, rather than a reactive, approach to risk. They were not built to avoid disaster, but to confidently withstand it. A society's brilliance means nothing if its knowledge dies with a single generation. The survival of these engineering marvels across centuries, through wars and the rise and fall of empires, points to a different kind of infrastructure, one built not from stone, but from memory and mentorship. These civilizations created sophisticated, self-perpetuating systems for transferring the most valuable resource of all, practical wisdom. In the shadowy halls of Egyptian temples, mathematics and engineering were not abstract sciences, but sacred arts taught through a master-apprentice model. A young student would not read a textbook on how to move a 2-ton block of stone. Instead, he would stand beside an experienced builder for years, learning the precise angle for a ramp, the feel of the correct stone consistency, and the chance used to coordinate a team of laborers, all through direct, hands-on repetition. This was knowledge encoded in muscle memory and lived experience, far more resilient than any fragile scroll. Later, in medieval Europe, this tradition evolved into powerful guilds of stonemasons and builders. These were not just labor unions, they were the guardians of an entire intellectual tradition. To protect the economic value of their skills, they shrouded their techniques in secrecy, using coded language and symbolic drawings that only initiates could decipher. A complex architectural detail might be represented by a simple, geometric symbol on a tracing floor, a diagram that was meaningless to an outsider but contained a world of engineering insight for a trained mason. This system of secrecy, while exclusive, effectively preserved advanced building principles through plagues and invasions. Oral traditions were the living libraries of the ancient world. Rhythmic poems, chants, and stories were used to memorize complex formulas for mixing mortar, the astronomical alignments for a temple, or the precise sequence for constructing a self-supporting arch. This was knowledge set to a rhythm designed to be recited and remembered, passed from elder to child in an unbroken chain. They also used physical models, creating small-scale versions of buildings out of clay or wood to test designs and demonstrate principles of structural integrity before a single foundation stone was ever laid. This multi-layered approach, combining hands-on apprenticeship with symbolic communication and oral history, created a robust safety net for human knowledge. It ensured that even if a library burned or a dynasty fell, the practical understanding of how to make a city thrive could be patiently rebuilt by the next generation, one careful lesson at a time. These magnificent structures demanded more than brilliant engineering. They required a steady flow of resources to function. A self-sustaining city was an economic engine as much as a hydraulic or agricultural one, with financial systems perfectly calibrated to support its physical needs. In the empires of Mesoamerica, tribute was the lifeblood of urban infrastructure. Conquered territories paid not just in gold or jewels, but in practical goods, food, and, most importantly, labor. This constant influx of material and manpower funded the massive public works projects, the cleaning of canals, and the repair of temples that kept the entire system running. It was a form of taxation that directly translated into civic maintenance. Meanwhile, in the city-states of ancient Mesopotamia, the great temple complexes acted as the central banks and distribution hubs of the entire economy. Temple scribes kept meticulous records on clay tablets, tracking vast stores of grain, wool, and oil. They managed the workforce, allocated resources for construction projects, and ensured that surplus from good harvests was redistributed during lean times, preventing famine and social collapse. This was a command economy on a city-wide scale, with the temple ensuring that every part of the urban machine had the fuel it needed to operate. Later, we see the emergence of more formal municipal governance in places like ancient Rome. Here, the state collected taxes in coin, and a portion of this revenue was explicitly earmarked for the upkeep of the very infrastructure that made the city viable. A special fund maintained the aqueducts, another repaired the roads, and a third cleaned the sewers. This created a virtuous cycle where the taxes paid by a thriving population were directly reinvested to make the city even more prosperous and healthy. The critical insight shared by all these models was the seamless integration of economic planning with physical design. The engineers who designed the aqueduct did not just calculate the water flow, they helped design the tax code that would pay for its maintenance. The architects of the granaries worked with the temple accountants to ensure there was always a budget for new storage jars. This long-term perspective, this understanding that a city is a financial entity that must fund its own existence, is what separated a fleeting settlement from a civilization that could last for 1,000 years. The stones we admire today were paid for, maintained, and cherished by economic systems that saw them not as expenses, but as the most vital of investments. Yet even the most perfectly balanced system is vulnerable to a changing world. The principles that allowed these cities to thrive for centuries did not vanish overnight. They were gradually eroded by forces both environmental and human, a slow unraveling that holds urgent lessons for our own time. One of the most powerful of these forces was a shifting climate. The magnificent Maya cities, with their intricate reservoirs and canals, were masterpieces of water management, but their systems were designed for a specific range of rainfall. When prolonged, severe drought struck the region, their carefully calculated reserves were simply not enough. The reservoirs dried up, the agricultural base collapsed, and the social contract that bound these cities together fractured under the strain of scarcity. A civilization that had mastered its environment for 1,000 years was ultimately overwhelmed by it. On the other side of the world, the Roman Empire faced a different kind of unraveling. Its legendary aqueducts and grain distribution networks were wonders of logistics, but they created a dangerous dependency. The city of Rome itself grew to a population of over 1 million, a size that was utterly unsustainable without the constant, violent influx of resources from conquered territories. This was not a closed-loop system. It was an extractive machine. When political instability and military overstretch began to fray the empire's edges, those long, vulnerable supply lines were cut. The urban centers, now completely reliant on distant grain and slave labor, began to starve. Their own advanced engineering had made them fragile. In some cases, the very success of a technology sowed the seeds of its own decline. A sophisticated irrigation network could allow a population to boom, but that larger population would then place even greater demand on the water table, sometimes leading to salinization, where mineral salts build up in the soil and poison it for future generations. What began as a solution to one problem could, over generations, create a far worse one. The greatest threat was often a shift in priorities. A new ruling class might emerge that was more interested in short-term monument building than in the dull, essential maintenance of underground drains and water channels. When the political will to fund and repair this invisible infrastructure faded, the entire system would slowly clog and fail. The aqueducts would crack, the terraces would erode, and the knowledge of how to fix them would be lost within a generation. The decline was rarely a single catastrophe. It was a cascade of small failures, a forgotten cleaning schedule for a cistern, a neglected repair to a terrace wall, a decision to prioritize a new palace over the old sewers. Each forgotten task was a single thread pulled from the tapestry, until one day the entire magnificent design simply came apart. The echoes of their genius are no longer silent. Across the globe, a quiet revolution is underway as modern scientists and engineers turn to these ancient blueprints for answers to our most pressing problems. Archaeologists are no longer just documenting ruins. They are collaborating with hydrologists to understand the precise angles of a 2,000-year-old aqueduct, discovering flow rates that rival modern concrete channels. In the field of permaculture, designers are actively reviving the lost art of terrace farming, studying the layered soil structures of Machu Picchu to combat erosion and create hyper-efficient, vertical gardens in our own crowded landscapes. The principles are proving to be timeless. The passive cooling systems of ancient Persian wind catchers are being reverse-engineered into modern architectural designs, offering a blueprint for cooling buildings in hot climates without a massive carbon footprint. Instead of fighting the sun and wind with energy-intensive technology, we are learning to invite them in and guide them, just as the forgotten engineers did. The sophisticated water management of the Maya, with their reservoir networks and filtration systems, is now providing crucial insights for communities in drought-stricken regions, teaching us how to capture and store seasonal deluges for the long, dry months ahead. This is not a romantic look backward. It is a practical, urgent search for proven solutions. The wisdom of these anonymous masters, carved in stone and etched into the land, is re-emerging as a vital guidebook for a world learning to live in balance once more. The names we have lost were not just those of elite men. History's spotlight often falls on kings and generals, but the hands that shaped these self-sustaining cities belong to a far more diverse group of innovators. Engineering knowledge in the ancient world was a fluid currency, flowing across the rigid lines of gender and social class. In many societies, women were the unsung hydrologists of their communities. Among the indigenous peoples of the American Southwest, for example, women often held the primary responsibility for designing and managing the intricate water-catching systems that fed their crops. They decided where to place check dams and how to channel runoff, their expertise passed from mother to daughter for generations. This was not a hobby, it was a vital, specialized skill set essential for survival. Likewise, the monumental construction projects we marvel at were built with the indispensable knowledge of enslaved individuals and common laborers. In the Roman world, The foremen overseeing the precise laying of an aqueduct's gradient were frequently enslaved men who possessed a deep, practical understanding of geometry and materials. Their hands guided the stones into place, their eyes ensuring the water would flow for centuries. A master architect might draw the grand vision, but it was the skilled artisan, the stonemason, and the metalworker who understood the granular physics that turned a plan into an enduring reality. This collective effort wove together different strands of intelligence. A temple priest contributed his understanding of celestial mathematics to align a city with the stars. A military officer applied his logistical genius to the problem of supplying a remote fortress. A farmer, whose family had tilled the same terraced hillside for 100 years, understood the soil's composition and drainage better than any scholar. They did not work in isolation. Their knowledge was shared on the scaffolding, in the granaries, and at the communal well, creating a rich tapestry of practical wisdom. To see these ancient marvels as the product of a single brilliant mind is to miss the point entirely. They stand as monuments to collaboration, to the idea that human progress has always been, and will always be, a collective achievement. The brilliant solutions of ancient engineers were never trapped within a single city's walls. They traveled, carried along dusty caravan trails, and across stormy seas on the very same routes that moved silk and spices. Knowledge was the most valuable cargo of all, a silent exchange that connected distant civilizations and sparked revolutions in how to build a lasting world. Persian Qanat technology, a masterful system for tapping underground water, did not remain in the desert. It journeyed west with traders and conquerors, emerging in the dry landscapes of Spain, where it was known as the Voyage de Agua, and eastward all the way to the oases of western China. Builders in each new location adapted the core principle, tailoring the tunnel depth and ventilation to their own specific geology and climate. This was not simple copying. It was creative adoption. In a similar fashion, the robust architectural principles of Rome, with their perfect arches and enduring concrete, became a blueprint that influenced construction from the bustling cities of North Africa to the northernmost forts of Britain. A local builder might never see Rome itself, but they learned the techniques from Roman engineers or from the legionnaires who demanded structures that would not collapse. This created a shared architectural language across the empire, a language of stability and grandeur. The Silk Road was far more than a commercial highway. It was an information superhighway for its time, transmitting technical schematics and construction secrets alongside bolts of fine cloth. A caravan stopping in a Central Asian caravanserai was a rolling university, where stories of Chinese bridge building might be shared with Mesopotamian hydrologists over a shared meal. This constant cross-pollination led to spectacular hybrid solutions. In India, you can find stepwells that combine the water management genius of the Qanat with the intricate, monumental artistry of local temple design, creating structures that are both profoundly practical and breathtakingly beautiful. This global exchange shatters the illusion of isolated genius. No civilization invented sustainability entirely on its own. They stood on the shoulders of giants, borrowing, testing, and improving upon ideas that had been proven across continents. The story of ancient engineering is not a collection of separate threads, but a single, interconnected tapestry of human ingenuity, woven together across thousands of miles and countless generations. Their blueprints were inscribed with a moral code as precise as their geometric calculations. Beyond the physics of load-bearing walls and the hydrology of aqueducts lay a foundational belief that human ingenuity was a part of nature, not its master. This was an engineering philosophy rooted in deep environmental ethics, a guiding principle that shaped every stone laid and every channel carved. In the Buddhist monasteries of ancient Sri Lanka and Tibet, the design of water systems was an act of compassion. Engineers created intricate networks of canals and tanks, but they also incorporated features to protect the smallest of lives. They built gentle ramps for animals to safely enter and exit reservoirs, and they designed filtration systems that would not trap or harm aquatic creatures. Water was not merely a resource to be exploited. It was a sacred element shared with all living beings, and its management was a reflection of that spiritual responsibility. This ethical framework ensured that their engineering solutions were inherently sustainable, because to harm the ecosystem was to violate a core tenet of their faith. On the other side of the world, many Native American communities lived by the principle of seventh-generation stewardship. A decision made today, whether to clear a forest for farming or to divert a stream, was weighed against its potential impact on the community 7 generations into the future. This long-term perspective meant that taking only what was needed was not a limitation, but a form of wisdom. It prevented over-harvesting, encouraged the renewal of resources, and fostered a profound respect for the balance of the local environment. Their settlements were not imposed upon the land, but emerged from a continuous, reciprocal relationship with it. The outcome of these ethical approaches was a form of engineering that served a dual purpose. A terrace farm in the Andes did more than prevent erosion and grow food. It created a new habitat for countless plants and insects, enriching the local biodiversity. A Persian wind catcher cooled a home without emitting any pollution, preserving the quality of the air for everyone. These solutions worked because they were designed for the entire system, not just for the human inhabitants within the city walls. This stands in stark contrast to much of modern engineering, which often operates on purely utilitarian calculations, optimizing for maximum human output with little regard for the wider ecological cost. The forgotten engineers demonstrate that the most resilient and enduring solutions arise when technical skill is guided by a profound ethical commitment to the world we all share. A city cannot rise from the dreams of a single mind, but from the coordinated labor of thousands. This coordination demanded a shared language far more precise than words, a universal vocabulary of measurement that allowed an engineer in Thebes to convey the exact dimensions of a pillar to a stonecutter in Aswan. Across the globe, these forgotten innovators independently arrived at the same brilliant conclusion: that consistency was the bedrock of civilization. In the sprawling, orderly cities of the Indus Valley, this principle was baked into every wall. They did not measure each brick as it was made. Instead, they enforced a single, universal standard, creating kiln-fired bricks whose length, width, and depth were locked into a perfect, repeating ratio of 4:2:1. A bricklayer in one neighborhood and a bricklayer in another, miles away, could work for years without ever meeting, yet the walls they built would align perfectly because every single brick was an identical, interchangeable component. This was mass production in the ancient world, an innovation that allowed their immense cities to be assembled with the efficiency of a modern factory. The Egyptians, too, mastered this art of the standard with the royal cubit. This unit of measurement, roughly the length from a man's elbow to the tip of his middle finger, was a deeply human scale. Yet its true genius was in its rigorous consistency. The length of the royal cubit was not a vague idea. It was physically carved into a master rod of black granite, preserved in a temple and replicated in wooden rods for the foremen of every major project. From the base of the Great Pyramid to the inner sanctum of a noble's tomb, every measurement was traced back to that single, sacred standard. This meant that a team working on the foundation and a team working on the capstone, who might never even see each other's work, were building toward the same invisible, perfect lines. The Maya took this concept of standardization into the abstract realm, developing a sophisticated numerical system that integrated units for time, distance, and even volume. Their mastery of the concept of zero allowed them to perform complex calculations for astronomical observations and architectural alignments that still baffle researchers today. They could calculate the volume of a reservoir or the angle of a staircase with a mathematical precision that enabled their cities to function as precise celestial calendars. These were not separate tools for separate tasks, but parts of an integrated system of calculation that governed everything from the harvest to the heavens. Without these reliable, shared systems, the grand projects of the ancient world would have been impossible. How could you direct 1,000 laborers to quarry stones for an arch if every foreman had a different idea of what a cubit meant? The development of measurement was not a minor administrative task. It was one of the most fundamental engineering achievements in human history, the invisible grid upon which every self-sustaining city was drawn. The stones of these ancient cities were not just seen, they were heard. Recent discoveries are revealing a hidden layer of genius where the very architecture was engineered to manipulate sound in ways we are only beginning to understand. The ancient builders were not just masters of stone and water, they were the first acoustic engineers, shaping the air itself to carry whispers and transform echoes into something magical. High on the steps of the Maya pyramid at Chichen Itza, a simple handclap does not return as a dull thud. It cascades back from the massive stone structure as a perfect, chirping echo that eerily mimics the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. This was not a fortunate accident. It is the result of precisely calculated stair dimensions and the unique acoustic reflection created by the pyramid's steep angle, a sonic signature deliberately designed into the heart of their most sacred space. Across the sea, the open-air theaters of ancient Greece achieved a different kind of acoustic perfection. In places like Epidaurus, a speaker standing on the stone stage could be heard with perfect clarity by every one of the 14,000 spectators, even those in the very last row, without ever raising their voice. The secret lies in the precise, stepped arrangement of the limestone seats. Each row acts as both a sound reflector and a filter, naturally amplifying the actor's voice while simultaneously suppressing the low-frequency rumble of the crowd, creating an acoustic environment that modern engineers struggle to replicate even with electronic assistance. Perhaps the most mysterious examples come from the underground temples of Malta, known as the Hypogeum. Here, deep beneath the earth, certain chambers are carved to resonate at the specific frequency of 110 Hz. When a person speaks or chants in these rooms, the sound vibrates through their entire body, creating an intense, almost physical sensation that can alter states of consciousness. This suggests that sound was not merely for communication, but was a core component of ritual and spiritual experience, a tool to bridge the world of the living with the realm of the gods. This sophisticated manipulation of sound waves reveals a physics-based knowledge that feels centuries ahead of its time. They understood how to use materials, angles, and space to shape auditory experiences, turning their structures into giant, passive musical instruments. This acoustic dimension added a profound layer of functionality, proving that for these forgotten engineers, a building was not truly complete until it could speak, sing, and resonate with the human soul. A masterpiece of engineering is only as strong as its most neglected crack. The grand aqueducts and terraced farms we admire today did not maintain themselves. They survived because their creators designed something even more crucial than the structures themselves, a permanent system for their care. The Romans did not simply build aqueducts and walk away. They established a dedicated core of skilled workers, the aquarii, who were the full-time guardians of the city's water. These inspectors and cleaners walked the channels regularly, scaling the towering arches to clear debris, patch leaks, and ensure the life-giving flow never faltered. Their work was not glamorous, but it was the heartbeat of Rome. Without this constant, systematic attention, the most brilliant aqueduct would have clogged with silt and collapsed within a generation. The same principle applied on a continental scale with the Inca road network, stretching for thousands of miles across some of the most brutal terrain on Earth. These roads were kept clear by a network of way stations or tambos. These were not just inns for travelers, they were forward operating bases for maintenance crews who lived along the route, tasked with clearing landslides after storms, repairing rope bridges, and ensuring the empire's messengers and armies could always move. The system was so effective that a message could travel faster across the Andes in the 15th century than it could for hundreds of years after. This institutional knowledge was often centralized in the most stable institutions of the ancient world, the temples. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, temple complexes were not just spiritual centers. They were the ancient equivalent of technical universities and public works departments. Scribes kept meticulous records on clay tablets, scheduling the cleaning of canals and the repair of granaries. Apprentices learned the sacred geometry of architecture and the practical science of hydrology under the guidance of master priests. This formalized training ensured that the knowledge of how to maintain the city's vital organs was preserved and passed down, generation after generation. A city that only invested in construction was building a time bomb. Its glory would be brilliant but brief. The cities that endured for centuries were those that understood a profound and simple truth: building something is an event, but maintaining it is a culture. This relentless, quiet dedication to upkeep is what truly separated a civilization from a fleeting settlement. The silent stones of a city often look upward. Many of these ancient urban centers were not just laid out for the living, but for the stars themselves. Their streets and temples were precisely aligned with celestial bodies, an engineering feat that merged the practical needs of survival with a profound spiritual worldview. The meticulous grid of Mohenjo-Daro, for example, was not arbitrarily placed. Its main avenues ran almost perfectly north-south and east-west, a direct alignment with the cardinal directions that required generations of patient astronomical observation to establish. This was more than urban order. It was a way of anchoring human civilization within the cosmic framework. In ancient Egypt, this principle reached its zenith. Temples were not simply oriented toward the sunrise, but toward the specific, fixed stars that circled the celestial pole, stars like Thuban in the constellation Draco, which served as the North Star thousands of years before Polaris. This precise stellar alignment ensured that the temple was a perfect conduit between the pharaoh, seen as a god on earth, and the eternal, unchanging realm of the heavens. The engineering challenge here was immense. Without telescopes or GPS, they relied on simple sighting instruments like the Merkit, a forked stick with a suspended plumb line, to track the slow drift of stars across the night sky over centuries. The mathematical precision needed to translate these observations into massive stone foundations is staggering. A single degree of error in the initial alignment would be magnified into a deviation of many feet over the length of a large temple complex, yet their structures remain breathtakingly accurate. These alignments served a deeply practical purpose as well. A city aligned with the solstice sun could use its own architecture as a giant calendar. The dawn light on the summer solstice might shine directly down the main thoroughfare, signaling the time to plant, while its position on the winter solstice marked the beginning of the harvest. This turned the entire city into a communal timekeeping device, synchronizing the agricultural and ritual life of thousands. The celestial dimension was the final layer of genius, transforming a functional settlement into a living map of the universe, a place where every citizen walked daily through a landscape of both earthly necessity and cosmic wonder. The sheer magnitude of their ambition still takes our breath away. We are not talking about a single, isolated temple or a clever water channel. We are confronting entire landscapes reshaped by human will, projects whose scale rivals our own modern megaprojects in both size and complexity. Consider the Great Wall of China, a serpent of stone and earth that snakes for thousands of miles across mountains and deserts. This was not a single, continuous construction project, but a monumental feat of logistics and long-term planning that spanned dynasties. Imagine the sheer volume of material, the countless tons of stone and rammed earth that had to be quarried, transported, and laid in place by armies of laborers, all working on a timeline that stretched for centuries. The organizational mind capable of overseeing such an endeavor, of supplying remote workstations with food and tools, and of maintaining a consistent defensive standard across such an impossible distance, represents an administrative genius we can scarcely comprehend. Then shift your gaze to the other side of the world, to the Inca Empire and its royal highway system. This was not a simple path, but a paved and engineered road network that crossed some of the most extreme and vertical terrain on the planet, spanning over 24,000 miles. The coordination required was staggering. Labor forces drawn from conquered territories through a system of tribute had to be mobilized in the thousands. They carved stairways into cliff faces, wove suspension bridges from grass fibers across bottomless ravines, and maintained way stations at precise intervals. This was a project that demanded not just muscle, but a sophisticated understanding of geography, logistics, and human endurance. The project managers of the ancient world did not have computers or satellite imagery. They used knotted strings, oral commands, and a profound, system-wide intelligence to direct these human rivers. They moved mountains not with machines, but with meticulously organized effort. How could a society without formal blueprints or digital communication possibly manage such colossal undertakings? And what does their success tell us about the potential of collective human purpose? This ancient wisdom is not a relic confined to history books. It breathes in the very bones of our most forward-thinking cities today. A quiet revolution in modern urban planning unknowingly echoes the principles perfected by those forgotten engineers, creating a bridge across millennia. The contemporary push for green infrastructure, with its permeable pavements and rooftop gardens, is a direct descendant of the water-absorbing terraces of Machu Picchu and the hidden cisterns of Petra. We are relearning the fundamental lesson that a city must be a sponge, not a slate, allowing rainwater to replenish the earth instead of flooding the streets. The revolutionary concept of the circular economy, where waste is designed out of the system, finds its ancient precedent in the meticulous recycling of organic matter and water in Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Valley. We are finally understanding that there is no such place as a way, and that true sustainability lies in creating loops where one process's output becomes another's vital input. Even the sleek, energy-efficient standards of passive housing, which use building orientation and thermal mass to eliminate the need for conventional heating and cooling, are a rediscovery of the ancient art of climate-responsive design. The thick adobe walls of desert pueblos and the subterranean cities of Cappadocia were mastering passive temperature control thousands of years before the term was ever coined. This growing recognition is sparking a profound shift in perspective. Modern engineers and architects are no longer viewing these ancient sites as mere archaeological curiosities. They are treating them as living laboratories, poring over their designs to decode solutions for our own urban crises. Hydrologists study the precise gradients of Roman aqueducts to improve gravity-fed water systems in developing nations. Architects analyze the wind catchers of Persia to design natural ventilation for skyscrapers, drastically reducing their carbon footprint. This is not nostalgic imitation. It is a pragmatic mining of a deep and proven intellectual resource. The reconnection with this ancestral knowledge represents a full circle in humanity's long quest to build a lasting home. For a time, we believed technology alone could insulate us from the natural world, but we are now rediscovering a more profound truth. The way forward to a resilient future is illuminated by the enduring light of the past, proving that the most sustainable path was mapped long ago by those who understood that civilization must be a partnership with the planet, not a conquest of it. But how can we possibly hear the whispers of these forgotten engineers across such a vast gulf of time? Their true legacy is being recovered not by treasure hunters, but by scientists using tools that would seem like magic to the ancients themselves. Ground-penetrating radar sends silent pulses deep into the earth, painting a ghostly image of buried foundations, hidden cisterns, and forgotten water channels without ever lifting a shovel. This technology reveals the invisible skeleton of a city, the grand plan that lies just beneath our feet. Meanwhile, specialists in sediment analysis take core samples from ancient lake beds and fields. By reading the layers of pollen, charcoal, and mineral deposits like the pages of a book, they can reconstruct the entire agricultural history of a region, determining what crops were grown, when famines struck, and how the land was managed over centuries. The very stones themselves are made to speak. High-resolution 3D laser scanning captures every chip and scratch on a weathered block, preserving tool marks with perfect clarity. The angle of a chisel, the width of a saw cut, these tiny details tell a profound story. They reveal the specific techniques used to shape the stone, the sequence of construction, and even the level of skill possessed by different work crews. This is how we know an Inca wall was built by master masons who could fit stones with breathtaking precision, and not by some mythical lost technology. The most powerful revelations come from smashing down the walls between academic fields. Archaeologists now work side by side with civil engineers to calculate the hydraulic flow of a 2,000-year-old aqueduct. Botanists analyze seeds found in ancient granaries to understand crop rotation, while climatologists use ice core data to correlate urban expansion with periods of reliable rainfall. This interdisciplinary approach is the master key, finally allowing us to piece together the sophisticated, systemic knowledge that powered these self-sustaining marvels. Every radar pulse and soil sample is a step toward reclaiming a lost heritage, giving a voice to the geniuses whose names are lost, but whose work now guides us toward a more resilient future. We stand at a crossroads our ancestors could never have envisioned, yet their solutions feel more urgent than ever. The climate crisis and our dwindling resources present problems of a global scale, but the answers may lie in the local, context-specific genius of these ancient builders. They teach us that a single, universal fix is a fantasy. The precise water channels of Petra were a perfect answer for the desert, just as the raised stilt houses of Southeast Asia were the only logical response to monsoons. Our modern approach often tries to force one technological solution onto every environment, consuming vast amounts of energy in the process. Their way was to listen first, then design, creating a custom-fit harmony with the local landscape. This principle of working with a place rather than imposing upon it could revolutionize how we build our own towns and cities today. Their designs were inherently multifunctional, a quality we desperately need to reclaim. A Persian wind catcher was not just an air conditioner. It was an architectural landmark, a ventilation system, and a piece of kinetic art. The terraces of Machu Picchu were simultaneously farms, erosion control, and structural support for the mountain. Every element served multiple purposes, creating a rich tapestry of efficiency. Contrast this with our own siloed infrastructure, where a water treatment plant only treats water, a power plant only makes electricity, and a park is just a park. What if our buildings could clean the air, generate power, and grow food, all as part of their fundamental function? The ancient circular system, where waste equals food, offers a powerful alternative to our linear model of take, make, and dispose. We mine materials, use them once, and bury them in a landfill, a process that is quite literally digging our own grave. They saw waste as a misplaced resource, a nutrient out of position. The organic waste of Mohenjo-Daro became fertilizer for its fields. The used water from a Roman bath eventually nourished crops. They operated within a closed loop, a perpetual cycle of renewal that modern circular economies strive to imitate. Perhaps their most profound lesson is the seamless integration of the spiritual and the practical. For them, polluting a river was not just an engineering failure. It was a moral and spiritual transgression. This deep, ethical framework enforced a long-term perspective that our quarterly profit-driven models completely lack. The principle of seventh-generation stewardship ensured that every decision was weighed against its impact on the distant future. What if we measured our own success not by next year's economic growth, but by the health of the environment 7 generations from now? The legacy of these forgotten engineers is not a set of blueprints to copy, but a mindset to adopt. It is a call to re-enchant our relationship with the material world, to see our cities not as machines to be fueled, but as living organisms to be nurtured. The sustainable cities of tomorrow will not be built with smarter concrete alone, but with a wiser philosophy, one that remembers we are not separate from nature, but a conscious part of its endless, brilliant cycles. Their silent legacy is a blueprint for our survival. These forgotten engineers were more than just builders. They were profound visionaries who understood a truth we are struggling to relearn, that a civilization can only endure when it exists in a delicate balance with the world around it. Their cities were not conquests over nature, but partnerships with it, achieving a resilience that allowed them to flourish for centuries. They looked at a desert and saw a hidden ocean in the rock. They looked at a steep mountainside and saw a fertile, terraced garden. They looked at the wind and sun and saw a natural heating and cooling system. Every innovation, from the intricate water channels of Petra to the seismic dance of Machu Picchu stones, was rooted in a deep, observant harmony with the forces of the earth. We now face a global crisis of sustainability, with our resources dwindling and our climate shifting. It can feel like an insurmountable modern problem. But the evidence carved into the landscape tells a different story. Human ingenuity has already solved these fundamental challenges of water, food, energy, and waste, not with complex technology, but with elegant, intelligent design. We are not starting from scratch. We are walking a path they already mapped with breathtaking precision. Their work reminds us that the knowledge to build a lasting world is not a future discovery, but a forgotten inheritance. By looking back to these masters of sustainable design, by studying their holistic principles of closed loops and passive energy, we can find the inspiration to create our own urban centers that are not just efficient, but truly alive. Our future cities can be designed to give back more than they take, to nurture their inhabitants while enriching the environment. The stones of these ancient places hold a quiet promise that the wisdom to build a future that endures has been here all along, waiting for us